Let's talk a little about Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin. These are two individuals who have a lot in common but also a lot of differences. I was going through some of their material on YouTube, basically their discussions, interviews, debates, whatever you would like to call it, and also some additional things from both of them. I confess, I haven't seen, every single Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro clip because they're very lengthy. Even the episodes of the Rubin Report, very, very lengthy, and just to listen to that stuff 2 hours and 20 minutes straight, that can take its toll on you, so to speak. But, they shared a lot of ideas, and there's just a little bit room for pushing back, and that, of course, is the absolute largest criticism of Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, is that Dave Rubin just does not push back enough, to not only Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin just doesn't push back enough, period. Okay, why don't we start with the elephant in the room, gay marriage. There's a very famous clip on YouTube where, Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro are discussing, the likelihood of whether or not Ben Shapiro would bake a wedding cake for him. Or would you, it's like, would you bake a wedding cake for Dave Rubin? And he's just like, no. And, it's just like, he says it's something sinful because of, of his Orthodox Judaism. At the same time, though, it's like, would he also attend social events with him and his husband? He says yes. Would he make a cake for him that was not exclusively associated with the wedding? And he says yes. And a lot of people were really, really tearing Dave Rubin to pieces for that sort of, but we're still friends, right, kind of attitude. Because it's like, a lot of people are just becoming less tolerant of that sort of excuse that Ben Shapiro has laid out, where it's just like, would you ever accept that from somebody, from any other sort of minority, when it's like, would you ever tell someone, I'm not going to attend your wedding because you're marrying a black person? Or something actually relevant to Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro. Would you say, I'm not going to attend your wedding because you're marrying a Jewish person? Or, in the opposite for those guys, you're marrying a Christian, or you're marrying a Hindu, someone who's not of their religion. Would you... I don't think many people in this day and age would actually accept that publicly. A lot of people voice their feelings on YouTube in the comments sections because of anonymity and no one really knows who they are, but it's a very, very difficult thing to still uphold, and we've seen an enormous amount of just a very large shift in the whole concept of gay marriage, from 2011 to the present day. In 2011, we would have all the Republican candidates on stage, during the presidential debate saying marriage is between a man and a woman, it is a sacred 6,000-year tradition. And then, 2015, during the primaries, then you hear, well, I'm opposed to gay marriage, but if my kid were gay, I would be fine with that. It's like very, very slowly taking a liking to it. Not to mention, we have people like Dave Rubin, not to mention people like Milo Yiannopoulos. And a lot of people are just sort of like, well, you're going to be friends with someone, but you wouldn't attend their wedding because of who they are? What on earth is that? And it's a very difficult thing for the masses of America to totally accept. I'm talking about Ben Shapiro now, not Dave Rubin, to still try and claim that, you view that as something sinful. Furthermore, Al Franken, the now disgraced Senator Al Franken, had a very nice response to anyone who says that marriage is between a man and a woman, where it's like, marriage is something that is an evolving concept. It is something that changes from society to society. It's like, it is not this sacred 6,000-year tradition that is only one way, and this way or nothing at all. We have, 4 wives in Islam. The king of Swaziland had 12 wives. It's like, not to mention, Romans were very involved with homosexuality. It's like, this is something that changes across civilization. So it is impractical, and it is also disingenuous to say that this is something that is reserved, exclusively for one man and one woman. And even in Brazil, they talked about, civil unions between one man and multiple women. And it's like, this is something that really changes across all civilization. And now, if you haven't, forget all those examples just for the fact that homosexuality and gay marriage is becoming more and more present. It is my prediction that by the year 2045, we will have gay marriage in 49 states, legal, except Mississippi. Some other things, though, that Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro really kind of go back and forth on are like the concepts of abortion. Now, this is something where, it's like Ben Shapiro has a very good stance on abortion. I'm also pro-life, so it's like he is not the kind of most welcoming character. And when he's talking to Dave Rubin about abortion, I was almost kind of hoping that Dave Rubin would get the upper hand in the argument, which he did not. But at the same time, just like, but I really should clarify, that's just because, it's not only what you say, but how you say it. And as somebody once said, about watching your tone because you can do more harm than good. Because Dave Rubin had a very interesting stance on that. He's like, 20 weeks is the cutoff for life. Like, he can accept an abortion before 20 weeks. But, after that, it's like it's very clear that the fetus would probably feel some sort of pain. And really, we should stop referring to them as the fetus. We can say the unborn child will feel some level of pain. But, so that's when he thinks the cutoff should be. But, Ben Shapiro is just sort of like, he has a good stance on that because it's just sort of like, whether, the unborn child is inside the mother's womb or outside of the mother's womb in her arms, that's like a difference of 5 inches, and I don't really have many qualms about that. I just thought it was Dave Rubin was the one who put up the very interesting stance that he chose that because, about feeling pain. There was also this channel called Nuance Bro that mentioned that once the baby develops brain waves, then that should be the time when you were saying that this is actually someone that is alive and could be recognized as a person. On a personal level, I just this is one of the people I actually agree with is Ben Carson, of all people. Back when he was running for president, he just released a simple statement. He said, "Abortion for convenience is repugnant." And of course, Ben Carson had exceptions in his platform. As a doctor, he was like absolutely not, on jeopardy to a woman's health, And yeah, I totally get rape, incest, jeopardy to a woman's health, but abortion for convenience is repugnant. Yeah, I'm sure I sound really light and airy right now, but, those are some things that, they're difficult subjects to talk about, but YouTube is one of the places where we can exchange ideas. And on that note, Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin really talked about Jimmy Kimmel, like, how he is somebody who is bringing his son into the Obamacare debate and how he thought Obamacare was a good thing. And then Ben Shapiro was like, that was, a very bad thing to do. Ben Shapiro would never involve his kids in anything like that. And, it's like, but the thing is, coming from the more conservative side, isn't it supposed to be all about freedom and individual choice? And, freedom, civil liberties, right? And freedom of speech. What about that one, freedom of speech? I know you don't have to agree with everything that somebody says, but just to say that, he should not have done that, doesn't that just sort of saying that, he should not say certain things? Doesn't that just sort of, give off the impression that certain things are off limits, which not only Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, but the entire intellectual dark web is opposed to? I understand that you agree with the content material, but you're not actually just addressing his platform. You're addressing, the fact that he chose to present his side of the argument in a particular way, and he involved his son in that, and yes, okay. If you disagree with that, then doesn't that mean that certain types of speech are not permissible, which is completely contrary to what the IDW is all about? That was just sort of an observation, but one of the big things that Ben Shapiro does not do very well, just on a personal, kind of like opinionated thing from me anyway, is he really tries to equate, policy with fact. He's just sort of like, the policies should be based on statistics, the policies should be based on the numbers, the policies should be based on, I guess, arguments that just come from things like data, and completely excluding the human element. Because you can, of course, everybody's for facts and data. Yes, of course. It's just there are too many facts. That's why we have to talk to each other. That's a quote from Jordan Peterson, by the way. So it's like, just to sort of say that, someone, like Ben Shapiro completely discredits people using their own personal stories as a way to formulate beliefs. He's like, those are just anecdotes, they don't mean anything. But the real answer is, those things don't mean anything to him. Not to the people who actually live through this stuff, and the people who would actually be affected by these policies. Yeah, you know what? Someone who is a homosexual is going to have something to say about gay marriage, because it affects them directly. Not to mention all the stuff that we dealt with, during the civil rights era that was about race, because it affected people directly. It's like their lives are actually in play. And Ben Shapiro's just like, hey, let's just reduce this all down to data. Well, now it's like, of course, we have things like universal suffrage right now. On the notions of trans people, when, he makes, a fair point about trying to say that there are people who are not trans that can give, more well-formulated opinions about, trans culture in America. I completely get you that. That's just academics, right? You don't have to belong to a particular social group to know something about it. You don't even have to be from part of the world to know something about another part of the world. And we should never accept that, oh, you're not from this place, you don't know anything about it, you're not this type of person, you don't know anything about it. But you can't go too far and say, though, that a trans person's, personal stance on this that comes from their own personal experience should be discredited. If you're doing that, you are removing any sort of humanity from the equation. You are removing, the human element from these policies. And these policies aren't designed to configure statistics. These policies are designed for people, and you have to recognize how they affect people. And it's like, we draw a very nice distinction with things like finance and economics. Finance is more about numbers. Economics brings in the social aspects into things of this nature. So that's just sort of kind of the nutshell version about it. And that was a bit of a sort of pivot into economics, but it's the same core principle. You cannot disregard the human element that is affected in these issues. You cannot do that, because otherwise then you're just, treating people as statistics to fit your narrative, which is the exact same thing that you're trying to say that they shouldn't be doing. You're just trying to reduce people down to numbers, to quantifiable entities, because it is more convenient for you to force your narrative onto society. That seems rather obvious, but that's a point where I think Ben Shapiro does not do very well. When it comes to the notion of free speech and hate speech, we had Dave Rubin back on the Young Turks. I found a video from him online that only had about 3,600 views. Very, very unpopular, but it was a Q&A, and Dave Rubin said something like, hey, send in your questions, we accept anything, except, blatant racism, blatant psychotic racism, I should say, and homophobic slurs. And then, it's just like, that is the entire thing about hate speech and free speech. That's the entire discussion right there. They're sort of just saying, we no longer want to tolerate things like blatant psychotic racism and homophobic speech. What Dave Rubin just kind of did was he was like, hey, there are certain things that are unacceptable that we don't want to talk about. Okay, because they're unacceptable and they're also just kind of detrimental to many social groups. That is why people are so opposed to this. That is why people are just trying not to use this masquerade of freedom for just trying to blurt out blatant psychotic racism and homophobia. Okay, we've kind of just solved the entire free speech on college campuses thing right there. We've kind of just completely solved what that hate speech does in fact exist. I mean, so many people like, Steven Crowder and Milo were talking about how there is no hate speech, there's only free speech. Well, that's painfully not true. So we have a bigger question with though is, do we make it illegal? I mean, do we make it against the law to say certain things? I don't have an answer for that. I know that Elizabeth Warren has talked about that in the Senate, that she was trying to say that hate speech serves as a detrimental and existential threat to certain communities, therefore it should be illegal. I don't know how far that goes. I mean, one way we can break it down is, in many nations, they've banned things like the Nazi salute, and the world didn't end. I mean, if they were to ban Nazi salutes in America, I wouldn't care at all, to be honest. And if you actually do care about that, it's not really worth it. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, because something like that doesn't ban intellectual discussions. Something like that does not limit the exchange of ideas. So that is drastically different than anything that would actually have somewhat of an impact on free thinking. It's just like, banning the Nazi salutes and the N-word, that's kind of just purely irrelevant to intellectual discussions. If they were to actually implement laws like that, then I would follow them. And I think most people would. After 7 days of the initial shock, they would follow those types of discussions. So that's one point where I think Dave Rubin has really pivoted, because this was back on the Young Turks before he got all the money from the Koch brothers, and before he was given this new, I guess, classical liberal platform, and before he talked to Larry Elder and had this mind-warping viewpoint. Yeah. So, do you think that people like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro are real or fake? I'm not really sure. I really don't know how much these entertainers actually go about things. I don't know how much they put on a show for the cameras and how much is their genuine belief in themselves. I'm really not certain about it. And I definitely can accept that some of what they're saying is probably genuine, but I believe some things are probably also either exaggerated, they add in certain things to get a particular reaction from the audience, and they also are doing certain things in a certain way to get a desired result. They know how to manipulate a certain demographic on YouTube, and that's just what the intellectual dark web does. Jordan Peterson has been very open about that. I think Sam Harris is somewhat aware of it too, and of course Stefan Molyneux is, he almost, you can almost, just see how giddy he is about the fact that he is able to do that. I mean, that's why so many people were just kind of like, this guy's like practically running a cult, because that's just what he's doing, just pulling in people. He knows how to manipulate people in large groups, in large social groups. But going back to Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro, I mean, once again, just to recap a little bit, I would say that Ben Shapiro has a very good stance on abortion, and, he's just really kind of goes through a lot of these sort of social issues that we've dealt with, but it's definitely from, he incorporates a lot of social commentary into his abortion platform. Like he also has a line or something like, is passing through the vaginal canal the only thing that signifies life? And it's like, of course, no, you can have, a C-section or something, and you can be born that way, and that is just, it's fact-based, but it's also a social statement, so it's just like, there's a social element, especially something like, someone is the difference between being inside the womb and outside of the womb in the mother's arms is just like 5 inches. There's also a social idea that is connected to that. So he's all about, incorporating social things into his platform. It's just that, really just to try and just look at data and say this should be the basis of our policies. I'm not going to lie to you, this is ridiculous, because then you cannot treat people as statistics. They've tried this in the past, and it has been an absolute failure. Some examples would be the writings of Giovanni Gianmaria Ortiz, but we don't have to talk about that too much because it's not Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin. But it's like, it's just... we've talked about one thing that he's done well, one thing that he has done poorly. Also, I really did disagree with his stance on Jimmy Kimmel incorporating his son into the Obamacare discussion, and one of the things we do need to note about a lot of individuals, Jimmy Kimmel is a talk show host, right? But does he not have the right to have his own politics? Does he not have the right to share them? Does he not have the right to use his show as a platform for his own political viewpoints? Once again, Rubin and Shapiro should be all for that because, well, they're about freedom of speech, thought, open discussions. So that's one of the biggest things that I notice when people become critical of hosts. And furthermore, the fact that he incorporated his son into that conversation, well, once again, isn't that a freedom of speech issue? And to say that he should not have done that, or that is even, to say that is not, a good thing to do, isn't that, comprising his freedom of speech? Moreover, Dave Rubin has really flipped on free speech. Like, he drew very clear lines about what is, hate speech and what is not. Now he's included as a member of the IDW and listens to Milo Yiannopoulos talk about how, that Jews have too much power and stuff like that, and doesn't bat an eyelash. Well, that's all for me now. What do you think about Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro? Do you have anything to say at all? If you do, please drop a comment below, and if you want to push back on any of the things I've said, go for it. Let's talk.